This is Tim Staten with Tim Stating the Obvious. What is this podcast about? It's simple. You are entitled to great leadership everywhere you go, whether it's to church, whether it's to work, whether it's at your house, you are entitled to great leadership. And so in this podcast, we take leadership principles and theories and turn them into everyday, relatable, and usable advice.
And a quick disclaimer. This show, process, or service by trademark manufacturer, or otherwise does not necessarily constitute an implied endorsement of anyone that I employed by or favors them in representation. The views are expressed here in my show are my own expressed and do not necessarily state or reflect those of any employer.
Hey, Russell, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have you here. Hey, so I just want to do a quick recap because we've done several of the series now. And so we started the series off with the idea that there's a difference between management and leadership. And in leaders, we have to have the ability to have a vision and to be able to take risk. And those risks come with some unwanted consequences or side effects, and that is uncomfortable feelings and fear. And then we talked about how we have to overcome fear by developing courage and then deal with with those unwanted consequences and side effects, which is our feelings. And that's what we talked about in our last episode, is how important it is to be able to deal with our feelings and our emotions. And you provide a really great model on how to understand that and sift through ourselves and to work through it and becoming on masters of our own emotions and of others. So in this episode, what are we going to be talking about?
Right. So what we're going to talk about is generating power. So the essence of leadership, of course, is you have a vision, you need to go towards it. And the way to get there, one of the things that you need to be able to do is to be powerful. And by power, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what power is or have a good definition of it, but essentially here, power is the ability to create the results that you want. Right? If you don't have that power, you're not going to succeed as a leader.
Yeah. And so when you talk about generating power, you're talking about generating the results that you want. Can you kind of go a little bit more into that on what you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks. So power is a word that is used a little bit sloppily, if you would. And what I'd like to do is provide a little bit more nuance to it so we really know what we're talking about. So what I'd like to do is distinguish power from force and from authority. Okay, so force is when somebody is in a situation to force you to do something. The obvious thing is somebody pulls a gun on you and says, your money or your life, you're going to turn over your money. That person is deploying force. Of course, there are other ways than guns that force can be deployed. They certainly be economic force, cultural force, and whatnot. But I don't want to call that power, because the more nuance that we can bring here, the more effectively we can use these words and understand them. So that's force. Authority is a position. So if you're elected chair of the board of an organization, all of a sudden you've been given authority. If you're a boss, you have the authority to determine what tasks get done and not get done, who stays, who's fired, or whatever. That is authority, right? It comes with an office. Power, how I'm defining it now, power is your capability to produce the results you want. Okay, no one can give you power, no one can take power away from you. Power is self-generated or it's given up. We very frequently disempower ourselves, right? So there are many people in positions of authority who are not powerful. We call them weak leaders or weak bosses. So you can have authority, but you don't necessarily have power. On the reverse is you can be powerful, you can make things happen, right? And not be in a position of authority. And key to power, you can also be a very weak person with a gun, so you can deploy force and not be a powerful person, right? Your life may be a mess, in which case it's a good indication you don't have personal power there, right? So making those distinctions and then giving the definition of power is something that you generate or that you fail to generate. The focus on our session here today is how do you generate power, right? How do you generate the capacity to produce the results that you want in your life without pulling guns or without, having a position of authority? Does that make sense? What are your thoughts there, Timothy?
No, it makes really good sense actually on how you laid it out there. And so this really kind of provoked a thought that I had about how you have those who are not in positions of authority that seemingly still have that leadership quality about them because they can influence other people to make things happen. And if we're equating power to the ability to make things happen, and it's something that we generate. I never honestly looked at it that way. And I think that's a great way to look at it, because if we're generating our own power, my question is, how do we start in generating our own power? If we don't know where to start, where do we start with generating our own power?
Perfect question. So the first step in generating power is to take responsibility, to say, all right, I'm responsible for the results I create in my life. Our tendency, this is standard human tendency, is that when we're not getting the results we want, we blame something outside of ourselves. We could be blaming the weather. We can be blaming our boss. We can be blaming our spouse. She made me angry, right? That's giving away your power over your feelings. She made me angry, right? So as soon as you put it over onto her, there's nothing you can do except yell at her, right? So the technical term is you're putting the locus of power outside of yourself, as opposed to putting the locus of power inside of yourself. In a coaching, the distinction here, this is a key distinction, is either you're at effect, so you're at effect of something outside of yourself. I'm at effect of my wife, or I'm at effect of my boss, or I'm at effect of the weather, or I'm at cause. So I'm going to cause the results I want in my life. Okay, so this is a lens to look through. It's not the truth. It's not how the world really works. It's just a way of looking at the world that starts you generating your own power.
So I'm reminded of the words have meaning, and I don't know if you've heard that saying often. I know I have in my career. When either we write things or we say things, and people are like, "Hey, you know what? Words have meaning. That's not the right word that we want to use there." And then that also reminds me of, how we address things and the way we say them could also relate to how we give away power, versus like, what you said, that, my wife made me mad or my coworker made me mad. So what would be a better way of framing that to help us shift our mindset from retaining power, but still assigning the right cause and effect relationship to something?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure what you mean by the cause and effect relationship, but if we just take that one example of somebody else made me mad, right? So you're being at effect of someone else. You're giving away power. You're giving away the power to somebody else to control your feelings, to determine what your feelings are. It's a total disempowerment. What's really happening in that situation is somebody, let's just call him Joe. Joe did something that you assessed as wrong. You made an assessment, you made a judgment that what Joe did or said was wrong or disrespectful to you, right? And from that assessment or that interpretation of what Joe said, you generated the feeling of anger. You generated the feeling of anger. So if you remember from episode 3 when we were talking about feelings, that our feelings come from our interpretation of an event. So Joe did something, we interpreted that event as bad or disrespectful or wrong, right? And then we generated our anger from that assessment that we made of what Joe did, right? So it's a little complex, but we're responsible for our feelings because we're responsible for our interpretations. And in any respect, whatever our interpretation is, we're still responsible for our feelings. We created our own feeling there. Joe did not. And the point, though, is not so much whether the cause and effect, whether it's true, whether we're following some law of the universe. The effect is that if we assign Joe the responsibility over our feelings, we're giving away power, and that's what we don't want to do. We want to say, okay, I'm angry now at what Joe did. I've created my own anger here. What am I going to do with it? What are the results I want from this situation? That's generating power.
Right. So when we generate the power and we understand that, what is the next step? and after we take responsibility for our own perspective, what is the next step?
Yeah. So the next step is to ask, all right, what are the results that we want in this situation? Right? If Joe's a good friend, maybe the results are is we just want to communicate to him that what he said didn't work for you, and wondering whether there's a request in there. For example, hey, Joe, I prefer that you not speak about my wife that way. I'm just making this up. And Joe will say what Joe says, but if our goal here is to communicate to Joe how you reacted to what he said, and to keep the relationship or to even deepen the relationship, you communicate in a certain way. Right? What you said didn't work for me. I found it upsetting. My request is that you don't talk that way in the future. And Joe can say yes or no. And if he says, no, I'm going to continue talking that way in the future, then you have a decision to make. Is that a friend you want to keep or not? But you want to always act, coming back to your question, you always want to act from what are the results that I want, and what are the actions that I can take to produce those results. The old way, if Joe makes me mad, right, then the only way you have to get the results you want is to yell at Joe, to get angry at Joe for saying that, and blaming him, making him wrong for saying what he said. And then the results you're going to get are probably a decayed relationship.
That's very interesting on how we come about that, because you talk about, I'm also thinking about our last episode where we talked about emotions, and that same framework is we got to take responsibility, and then we got to look at the results that we want and take action on those results. So how often then, I guess, do you find, I know the answer is probably going to be every day because you talk to people every day, but how do we keep ourselves out of a victim mentality and keep us into the retaining power mentality when it comes to interaction?
Yeah. So it's difficult, and the answer is practice, right? One, you need to accept responsibility. Say, right, I'm going to be responsible for 100% of the results I get in life, right? Now, clearly circumstances are going to happen, it's going to rain on your picnic, or a meteor is going to hit your house or whatever, that you don't have, quote unquote, control over. But you have control over how you respond to those situations, right? You have, and it's that you want to take on. What do I need to do? Coming back, what do I need to do to get the results I want? If we're blaming our boss, or, a classic example I get is my boss is over controlling, or my boss micromanages me, or my boss is dominating me, right? To be quite frank, your boss can only dominate you if you're dominatable, right? So what do you need to do to start generating the power, to assert boundaries, to stand up for yourself, to advocate for yourself, and tell your boss that, hey, this doesn't work. Let's see if we can find something else that works so that you and I have a good working relationship. But as long as we're blaming somebody else, we by definition put ourselves into victim mode. I'm a victim of that person. This is really key here about generating power, is that we like being victims. We like being victims because we get to be righteous about the harm that's being done to us. Let me say that again. We get to be righteous. We get to feel this charge of righteousness in us when somebody else, we perceive somebody else injuring us in some way. So we get that charge of righteousness, which we really feast on, we really love, but we also get to not take responsibility. We don't have to do anything if we're the victim. So that's what victimhood buys us. We get that good charge of righteousness. We get to talk to all of our friends about how we've been victimized by this person or that person or this social structure or that social structure, and we don't have to take responsibility. And what we get by not taking responsibility, of course, is we don't have to be exposed. We don't have to, going back to episode 2, we don't have to generate courage, because it's scary to take responsibility. We have to go out there and we have to expose ourselves. We have to expose ourselves to, maybe physical threats, to financial threats. Or most frequently in this world, in our world today, is we have to expose ourselves to emotional threats. Somebody may say no. Somebody may say you're a fool. Somebody may argue and fight with you, right? That's the exposure that we get to avoid by being a victim. Victimhood, by definition, is a person who's given up power. I'm giving my power away to somebody else.
So is this something that you have found to be recent, or is this a common theme that has been going on for years?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I can't answer with any degree of authority, historical authority, but my guess is that we have always gone into victimhood. Because if you look at fights, arguments that people have had, 2,000 years ago, there's always the sense of, you did something bad to me, right? But you're right. There's now, it's part of the zeitgeist here in the United States, this culture of victimhood where the degree to which you are a victim raises your status. So apparently, and I have not seen this personally, but apparently on, say, TikTok or other social media, there is there's an attempt to out victim your buddies. I'm a victim of this. I'm a victim of that. That may or may not be true. I'm just not aware of it. But the larger point is that those people, by seeing themselves as victims, are diminishing the richness of their lives or the capability of living a really good life.
No, that's a great point. And I mean, I'm on social media quite a lot. By nature of posting and the show and research and everything else that I do, for topics. So there is a degree of victimization, and then there also is a degree of, kind of like tabloidness to that. You're standing at the grocery line and you see the tabloids and you say, kid born with bat wings, and oh my goodness, you look at it. So there is like that, type of mentality to it. But I also agree with you that there is a increase in victimhood, and I'm wondering if that's because, like you said, we get some righteousness out of being able to say, hey, somebody did me harm and I am correct. And then you also bring up that you don't also have to take responsibility in it either, because somebody else did something to you that's beyond your control. And as we stay on this topic of maintaining our power, and also coming from a place of power to get things done, you talked about taking responsibility. So in situations like that, and we take responsibility and we look at the end results that we want, and you gave a great example of the boss, being over dominating to you. What is another common example that you can provide that might resonate with somebody of, I do that and I don't realize I do that?
Well, a good example, and maybe some of the listeners are starting to yell at their I don't use radios anymore, whatever they're streaming at their speakers here, is there are circumstances that happen over which you have no control. I said, the meteor hitting your house or raining on your picnic, right? And the question becomes I am a victim. Say you're walking down the street and somebody mugs you, pulls a gun and takes your money. I'm a victim. How do I generate power in that situation? Like, how do I generate power in a situation where the circumstances totally out of my control in some way injured me? Why aren't I a victim there? And I would say this, yes, you're a victim there, but what we don't want to do is then stay in our victimhood. The question is, we were mugged. How do we respond in a way that generates power as opposed to gives away power? Giving away power might be, hey, I'm never walking in the city again, right? Or I don't trust men. Say it's a man that mugged you. I'm not going to trust men, or I'm going to stay home. Or, the victimhood might be that they're whining and complaining to their friends for the next 5 years about being mugged and losing $40. If you come from a point of view or from the lens of being at cause, the question then becomes, what are the results I want? I've just been mugged. It was really terrifying. It was really scary. What do I need to do, right? What kind of life do I want to lead as a result of that right? And what are the actions I needed to take to get there? So it may well be, right? They ask, what did I do? In what way am I responsible for being mugged? Was I walking down a dark street, in the dead of night in a place that I knew to be dangerous? Okay. What do I need to change? How do I need to change my behavior so that I don't become a target of a mugging, right? There's been evidence shown that people that walk with great intention down the street, staring straight ahead, are less likely to mug than people kind of wander down the street looking at all the sights, right? Maybe I need to walk down the street with more intention, right? So you can sit and say, what do I need to do in the future not to be mugged? And there's some people say, well, I'm going to get a pistol and have concealed carry. Somebody pulls a gun on me, I pull a gun on them. So that might, right? Those might be ways. Those are ways of being a cause. What do I need to do differently so it doesn't happen again? So that's pre. And then the post is, how do I heal from this traumatic experience? How do I recover from this traumatic experience so it does not impact me? It does not lessen my enjoyment of life. So again, in answer to your question, a real common way we become victims is when circumstances out of our control impact our life. Our power comes in responding in such a way to those circumstances that enhances our life as opposed to diminishes it. Does that make sense?
No, this makes really good sense on being able to recognize the difference. And you bring up a very difficult thing that you mentioned that people need to do. And that is, what portion of responsibility do I need to take? Oftentimes I hear, well, you can't re-victimize the victim. That's not okay to do. But sometimes maybe we do need to take an honest look of what happened, look at the facts, and then take responsibility for what needs to be responsible for, right?
So, yeah, you put your finger on a really, really good issue. And I want to make a distinction between blaming and taking responsibility. And often people conflate or, put the two together, that to take responsibility is to blame somebody. Blaming is not a way of generating power. Blaming, when we blame somebody else, what we do is we generate righteousness again. I'm right, you're wrong, right? That kind of way of dealing with people, I'm right, you're wrong, doesn't work. It's another kind of, it just doesn't work. You're not producing results unless what you want to do is feel, hey, I'm better than you. If those are the results you want in your life, great, you're doing exactly the right thing. But that doesn't strengthen a relationship, and it doesn't help somebody else generate their power. You're not making a contribution to that person. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that there are a lot of people who think, I want to do what I want to do regardless of the, because I think the world should work this way. I think I should be able to drive my, fancy BMW into a dangerous neighborhood and leave the keys in the ignition, and then come back a day later and find the car still there with the key still in the ignition. Right? Not likely to happen. That's not the way the world works. That may be the way we want the world to work, but that's not the way the world works. So a more powerful way of being there is to say, all right, I'm going to take precautions not to have my car stolen by not parking in that neighborhood and taking the keys with me, right? So it frequently shows up between male and female relationships. Some young woman goes to a frat party, gets drunk, and gets raped, all right? That's a crime. There's no way of justifying that crime. The question I'd ask is, if that woman wanted to be at cause for her life and she did not, and the result she wanted was not to be raped, what kind of ways could she manage herself such to diminish that, right? Wear certain kinds of clothes, go with a buddy, don't drink so much, don't go to frat parties, whatever. We would all like to live in a world where people didn't get raped, but that's not the way the world works, right? So the question I'd ask the young woman is, what are the results you want, and what actions do you need to take to get those results? No blame, just power and responsibility.
Yeah, and I think that's a really hard distinction, maybe more in this day and age, but I would think that's a really hard distinction that we need to make between giving blame and assuming responsibility for the things that we need to take responsibility for. So another question I have then is, how often do you experience rationalizing away, not taking responsibility?
Like daily. I mean, my whole business is my whole coaching business is predicated on that people don't want to take responsibility, or they rationalize it away. I'm working with no. Well, so a real common, and this comes back to, again, episode 2 and 3 a lot, is somebody will see something that's not working in their organization. Okay, their boss is doing something that they don't like, or they even think that what the boss is doing is injurious to a project they're working on, right? And so taking responsibility would be generating power and going to the boss and say, hey, when you're doing X, it makes it more difficult for me to do what we said we want to do, right? But that's scary. You're talking to your boss. You're exposing yourself. The boss may say no. You may be wrong actually, or the boss has authority over you, so there might be some threat there. So the person will rationalize, I'm not going to do it because it's his responsibility to do the things right. It's not me to tell him what to do. Right? That's a classic sense of abdicating responsibility, giving up power, giving up power to your boss, or giving up power to the situation because you're afraid of feeling uncomfortable, right? That's, again, episode 2 is where we have to build courage here. Does that answer your question, or are you thinking of something else?
No, I mean, that answers the question, but I'm also thinking of, oftentimes when we rationalize away a behavior, right, to make it right. But let's say there's something, that I guess a real world tangible example of how somebody rationalizes away giving away or not wanting to take responsibility. Like, I can't possibly take responsibility for this because of X, Y, and Z. Like this, it just isn't my responsibility to take responsibility for because it's for somebody else. So you mentioned that boss employee relationship, but what about like on a peer-to-peer level? Because even with power, the ability to make things happen, just because you're not in an authoritative role doesn't mean you can't be a leader to make things happen. So on a peer-to-peer level, what would that look like?
Yeah. So a common example is when one of your peers, maybe a friend, a coworker, does something that you don't like or think is wrong, and you don't talk to them about it. You don't sit down and have a good a good conversation about what didn't work, about what that person did, what your concerns are around that, and making a request to do something different or to stop that behavior. And the rationalization will be, usually we go into victimhood, right? I'm a victim, he's injured me, or he's doing something wrong to me. But a rationalization there could be that it's none of my business, right? Or he's mean, or what we start doing is going to these, what we call cognitive distortions. We start exaggerating the threat, right? So we could catastrophize. If I go to Joe and tell him that what he did didn't work for me, he's going to get really angry and break off the friendship. That's catastrophizing. Or, real catastrophizing. He's going to slug me. That could be catastrophizing. Another really common rationalization is we do mind reading. We think we know what somebody else is thinking, right? And that mind reading, like I could say, think that Joe was just doing the best he could, or Joe is thinking that he was trying to help me. That mind reading often gives us permission not to act, right? We think we know what somebody else is thinking, and what we think we know gives us permission not to act. It's another way of giving up power. So those are two really common kinds of rationalizations.
Those are really great points. Having listened to everything, and I'm just thinking here, if I'm listening to this for the first time, never hearing about it, never really thinking about it, and I go, if I'm going to retain power in my life, and I got to take responsibility. And then I got to think about the results that I want and then act accordingly to achieve that outcome. So you're kind of asking a lot of somebody. How do I start that today? Like, what is there a tool that I can use right now today to put that into effect and start that?
There is. There's one thing I'd like to catch in your language there, if I could. You said, how do I retain power? Yeah, you said, how do I retain power? I'd like to swap out retain for generate, right? Because you may not have power to begin with. How do we generate power? How do we create power, right? How do we be powerful, right? So it's a generative process as opposed to a retaining process, which I see as a little bit more passive. Step one is to ask yourself, am I in any situation where you're not getting the results you want in your life, whatever it is, with your boss, with your spouse, with your kids, with your bloody car, it's breaking down all the time. The question to ask is, okay, what am I doing to contribute to this situation, and what can I do to change or mitigate the situation, right? So the question starts with, what can I do? As soon as you say, this person's responsible or that person needs to do this, you're giving up power. You're making somebody else, when you're making somebody else responsible for the results, you're giving away your power.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I kind of want to wrap this up here and kind of go over a couple of things. And you laid out a really, really good framework on how to generate power and start and put that into practice and exercise today. And then you make a really great point of, you have to practice this, right? It has to be a conscious thought starting today, moving forward. You have to be intentional about your thought process, and you have to be intentional about what you're doing. So if you were to summarize this up in a quick 1 minute to 45 second, how would you summarize up today's episode?
All right. To be a leader, you need to be powerful. Powerful does not mean force or domination or authority. Power is something that only you can generate for yourself, or you give up or surrender. No one can take it from you. All right. Understand that you're the only person who can generate power for yourself, and you're the only one who can surrender or give it away to someone else. So step number 2 then is to be a cause in every area of your life, or to take out the jargon, everywhere that you're getting results, you see what it is that I'm producing that produces those results, what I'm doing to produce those results. But more importantly, every area where you're not getting the results you want to ask yourself, what am I doing that's not getting the results that I want? And what do I need to do in order to get those results? Right? That's the essence of power. What can I do? What do I need to do to get the results I want? That's the essence. Okay? Anytime you see yourself blaming somebody else, assigning responsibility elsewhere for your results, whatever, even if it's the weather or it's God or whatever, as soon as you're doing that, you're surrendering power, right? And I'm not going to say there's anything good or bad about surrendering power. It's just that you're going to get different results in your life.
No, absolutely. And I really appreciate that. And Russell, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for doing this 4-part mini-series with us. I would like to ask everybody, if you got value out of what Russell brought to the table here over the last couple weeks, go in the links down below. And in the links in the description of this episode, you have his books and you have his website for coaching. Additionally, if you listen to this and you're like, you know what, I think I want to be a leadership coach. Russell, you offer that, don't you?
I offer 2 things. One, I certainly offer to coach leaders. If you want to be a more effective leader, come work with me. But I also offer a coach training program. The new one will start at the end of March. And this coach training program is the most effective way to step into your leadership. And that may not make sense. Why does becoming a coach make me a better leader? Good question. Give me a ring and we'll talk about it. I absolutely guarantee you it'll improve your leadership.
All right, Russell. Hey, thank you for sharing that. And I hope everyone got some value out of this. If you did get some value out of this and you want to ask a question or provide a comment, please do so below. Go to YouTube, Tim Stating the Obvious, or right below this one and comment on there. Or you go to timstatingtheobvious.com and leave a message on there. And any messages that I get for Russell, I will definitely pass your way on there. And I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this stuff with us. So again, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Tim.
As always, thank you for stopping by and checking out this episode and listening to it. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Before we go, I'd like to ask a favor of you if I could. If you could please share this episode with one or two people who you think might like this topic. If you haven't followed or subscribed on the platform that you're listening to, and hit all the bells and icons and all the whistles so that you know that when we post another episode, you'll be alerted, please go ahead and do all that before you go. If you got some value out of this episode, please leave a review or a comment so we can help spread the show to other people who might be interested in the topics that we've talked about here today, but may not have found our show yet. Again, thanks for stopping by. I'm Tim Staten, Stating the Obvious.